Hello and welcome to the Hidalgo Show. What you're about to see is a continuation of what our study was on Monday, family government. We're going to continue where we left off and do some commentating as we go through to try to bring the scriptures to life and show people why family government is extremely important, especially if we ever hope to restore a true government on this land. Okay, welcome to the Hidalgo Show, and this is a continuation of the study that we were doing on Monday. Today is the first day of February 2019, so welcome to February, Patriots. And of course, we are studying from a book that I found from the mid-1800s. This book is called Family Government, and we were on the second chapter, which was dealing with matrimony. And we just came to this sentence: "It is indeed the source of the most exalted, generous, and pure affections of human nature, and throws its radiant, cheering light over many a pathway where all would otherwise be dark and chill and cheerless." And it was talking about matrimony. We're going to continue with commentary. "It is the spring of incalculable good, or irreparable." Let me get that word again. It skipped here. "Or irreparable mischief, according as the relation is entered into discreetly or otherwise. It is hardly necessary for me to say now that I am a warm and decided advocate for marriage. We have known many who entertain unworthy views of this important institution. Many who affected to regard it as a state of bondage, and who spoke of the glorious liberty of a state of single blessedness. And, this is something that the world has constantly tried to advocate, this blessedness of being single and being able to govern yourself without any prohibition or any question or any other obligation. It's a sense of living a life without obligation that they're looking for, and they can't find that in marriage because they haven't found the blessedness of being together and functioning as one. But that was the whole point of marriage, was to function as one. And in that way, Adam, when Eve was taken from his side, from his rib, said, she is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. But we have watched these men for many years, and we have seen an end of all their perfection. They have generally been of no use to the world, and the licentiousness of some of them and the indolence and avarice of others have furnished a sufficient clue to the motives of their conduct. If our views be correct, if interests so numerous and weighty are involved in the hallowed union, it is important that due and proper caution be used in selecting the man or woman with whom we are to be so intimately associated through all life's scenes of joy or sorrow. So what the writer is saying here is that it is a weighty and very grievous process to select the partner, for the husband, the wife, and for the wife, the husband, to select that associate who you're going to be associated with through all of life's joys and sorrows. Our forefathers had it right in their pursuit of finding a worthy mate for their little girl or for their young man, in ensuring that the house they were marrying into was one that had substance and ability. Let's continue. Here it seems to us is the proper starting point, and in this important connection, almost everything depends on starting properly. Many families are permanently unhappy because the husband and the wife enter into holy wedlock under the influence of wrong principles and feelings on this subject. And certainly the focus in our modern day on toxic masculinity and on the toxic feminist movement, and the idea, and this is just the avarice of feminists today, that the idea that men can't even have an opinion about the use of a woman's body because it's the woman's body only, although they've become one in spirit and in flesh. So this principle is absent from the way that we look at things today, or the general public does. There are 2 or 3 grievous errors which deserve a brief consideration. In some instances, marriage is regarded simply as a convenient method of acquiring property. A young man is about to seek one who shall not only be mistress of his board, but who must be the partner of all his joys and sorrows. One who shall know every secret of his heart, and whose countenance shall be the mirror of his own bliss or discontent, the mother of his children, and a sort of presiding divinity at the altar of domestic peace. What then are the subjects of his inquiry? Does he ask, and let's pay careful attention here, what are her mental or moral qualifications for the responsible station to which he would call her? So, what are her mental and moral qualifications? Is she evenly yoked in Christ? Or is she one that has no affection for Christ and therefore of a different mental or moral qualification? Okay, next, let's ask, does he examine whether there be congeniality of temper or disposition or habits? Anybody ever run into someone who's just always mad, or a woman that's just scornful 24 hours a day, or a man who's just hateful all the time? These are dispositions, tempers, habits. Oneness of taste and aim. Do you have similar goals? Do you have similar taste? The first time she makes that souffle for dinner, I know nobody makes souffles anymore, but this is just an example. The first time she makes that souffle for dinner and you just can't stand it, okay, there's probably going to be an objection there. That's just a quaint circumstance, but you get my point. Whether she is pious, industrious, or discreet. One would expect such inquiries in view of the end, but no such thing. He settles his account in a much more commodious manner. With him, the whole matter can be determined upon arithmetical calculation. Okay, and this is the sad part. For instance, he ascertains the probable wealth of the father. He has occasion to refer to the textbooks, and by good luck learns the amount of taxable property given in. He counts the Negro houses. Of course, these were the days of the slaves. So he counts the Negro houses, or the property of the number of hands in the field, ascertains the amount of stocks, their probable value, finds out the number of children, speculates on the probable number of years the old father will be detained out of paradise. In other words, calculates as to how long the pattern is going to exist before he gets to inherit it all. And having considered the whole matter, and by the help of a few rules of arithmetic, he is, upon the testimony of figures, head and ears in love. What an indictment on this young man, right? Good Lord. If all he cares about is the wealth, what does it say about the nature of his deed? What is he really looking for in a marriage? We're talking Ebenezer Scrooge here. We're not talking, young William Wallace. So he is, upon the testimony of figures, head and ears in love, resolves on courtship, manages the affair with address, succeeds in persuading an amiable girl that she is the object of his heart's undying devotions. Sounds like Scrooge to me. Just to win the wealth over, right? Wins her affections and crowns a course of deep and successful hypocrisy. By an act of cold-blooded and sordid villainy, he leads her to the altar, hears from her lips the sweet tones of confiding love, plighting to him the vows of a guideless spirit. He hears all this, and yet with his eye upon lands and Negroes in stock, so that's property in this day of time. He purges himself before the throne of God. Sometimes his sordid spirit is cherished by parents. Let's stop here for a minute. Talking about purging yourself before the throne of God. You know, when one calculates what the purpose of marriage is, they need to go no further than the Bible. The Bible makes it clear that when one is married, they become one in flesh, bone of one's bone and flesh of one's flesh. With this understanding, it should be understood that it would behoove one who's looking to engage in a relationship in order to perpetuate a house and the faith, honor, integrity of a house, to look for a woman of honor and integrity, despite maybe not having the wealth that another one would have. But many times, and unfortunately probably a great number of times, the affections that the man or the woman is looking for are more of the how can he or she take care of me affection. And while this is an important factor, it should be understood that the ability to care for one really has more to do with the character of the man or the woman and the ability for them to keep the commandments, to keep the law of Christ, than it has more to do with that and less to do with their ability to sustain with fiat. Let's continue. Sometimes this sordid spirit is cherished by parents. They look to the marriage of their children only as it adds wealth to the family. And see, this is exactly what I was talking about. In order to perpetuate one's house, many kings were well known for marrying their children into prosperous homes, the homes of noblemen, the homes of other kings and princes and princesses. So these were always trying to rise up, always trying to marry up, into wealth. But how is wealth defined in Scripture? I mean, what value is there to a soul? Has anybody considered this? The value of a soul? Okay, so I mean, my point is, there's great value to a soul, more value than there is wealth on this earth. And so he that winneth souls is wise, says the Bible. And the fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom. So we can then, by those two scriptures, determine that it is the fear of God that brings the greatest wealth into one's possession, because it is the fear of God that compels a man and a woman who is interested in family government to run their family in such a way as to obey the precepts of God. So they go hand in hand. Hence, a great number of what the world calls prudent matches are formed by these sagacious. Boy, I've never seen that word before. The sagacious and far-seeing old folks, without much reference to the wishes of the parties immediately concerned. Here is a prudent old father who may be supposed to care greatly for his happiness, the happiness of his children, and he has growing up before him a lovely daughter with a heart susceptible of the purest affections. His daughter's heart and hand are sought by one who is amiable, intelligent, industrious, manly, in other words, masculine, and honorable. The heart he wins because the beautiful girl alone has to bestow, and with the instinct of pure and rational affection, he bestows it on merit. But gaining the hand is a different affair. Here a prudent, money-loving, mammon-worshipping father. Ooh, what an indictment. Mammon-worshipping. Remember what the Bible says. You can't serve both God and mammon. Here a prudent, money-loving, mammon-worshipping father has to be consulted, who, regarding his children, only value the increase the wealth of the family. Says he has made a much more prudent choice for his beloved child, one who will take good care of her, Ebenezer Scrooge, and provide well for her. To be sure, he never consulted congeniality or fitness of temper, disposition, and habits, other than as they are connected with getting money. Whether he be refined or coarse, intelligent or vulgar, pious or profane, the same potent rules of arithmetic settle the whole case. And a being young and beautiful and full of sensibility is, by the stern mandate of paternal authority, compelled to make vows with the lips at the altar of God, which the heart abhors to ratify. I have not language sufficiently strong to express my detestation, of the hoary sinner who can thus deliberately, in cold blood, immolate a lovely, trembling child upon the altar of mammon. Marriages of this sort must lead to disastrous results, and folks, that's what we're seeing today. Disastrous results, and whether it's based on the looks of a woman, the looks of a man, or whether it's based on the money he has, all these are invalid and putrid reasons for wanting to be one with someone. Let's continue reading. If nothing worse comes of it, there is at least the destruction of the peace and happiness, too frequently for time and eternity, of one immortal being. But sometimes a state of feeling is induced, which leads to desperate recklessness of conduct. And that's what I was talking about, this concept of love that we have propagated in our communities today ever since the revolution in the 60s, when love became the source of all the spring of youth. Okay, when we started to see people from their outward shell and their inner capabilities, and these are things which no relationship should ever be based on, which not unfrequently entails infamy upon more than one. Another error of fatal tendency on this subject arises from the extensive prevalence of a light and frivolous literature made up of love fictions. Here we go. This is exactly what I was talking about. Apart from the sickly vitiated taste, I have to look that word up too, vitiated, which is induced by the species of reading. It imbues the young with wrong and pernicious opinions and principles in reference to the everyday relations and obligations of life. And in no respect is it more injurious than that of than in the influence it exerts in the formation of matrimonial connections. The imagination and the passions having been principally appealed to by this sort of reading, and the judgment and understanding and conscience entirely overlooked, wrong views of love and of marriage as to its nature, obligations, and ends will necessarily result. Hence, thousands of young persons act on the presumption that all such affairs are regulated by fate or destiny. Their heads are full of ideal beings, such as have never peopled this globe since the gates of paradise were closed on the first offending pair. That's Adam and Eve. Hence, their night and day dreams are full of creatures beautiful as angels, with forms of perfect symmetry, and voices sweet as the songs of Eden's birds, and hearts incapable of cherishing aught but love and purity. Visions beam before the mind's eye of manly forms, lofty bearings, and the very soul of honor, genius of the first order, in bosoms that never felt the gush of impure passions, the stirrings of anger or ambition. And then, when the God of heaven is dethroned, and in his stead a divinity is enshrined, called chance, fate, fortune, right? Destiny. You see where this is going? To whom it is committed the management of all the matter. It is not very wonderful that we hear of falling in love at first sight, and of this too as a thing impossible to be resisted, and without ever stopping to consult reason or judgment or prudence or conscience in the matter, they love to distraction. And he who would whisper to them the propriety of pausing to examine a while whether all is suitable runs the risk of being charged with possessing a soul of ice. And this is absolutely true. You ever seen a love-struck couple and approach them and try to advise them on taking some time to think about, what their marriage, the fruit of their marriage might be? It just doesn't work anymore. You're seen as a man who has a soul of ice. I mean, I tried to advise recently a couple who came to me and actually asked me to give my opinion as to the appropriateness of their affection for one another. And it was only in the first couple hours of the first session. I planned on having many sessions, but it was in the first session and the first couple hours that already they became offended, because I started to relate biblical principles, biblical concepts, things that marriage being a agency of the Bible applied directly to it. Let me continue. Now, this class of people usually marry foolishly. Yes, they do. And live unhappily. They'll like it for a little while. They'll enjoy the intimacy with one another until they have that first child, and then all the affliction will run. But when those creatures of poetry and perfection come to encounter together the matter-of-fact relations of life, just like I just said, and find in each other not angels, but irritable creatures of flesh and blood, you start seeing a demon in each other, who are sometimes pitiful and ill-humored, and the path of life becomes rough and thorny, and the yoke chafes, because they neither see eye to eye nor pull the same way. Then, when too late to profit by the discovery, they find they were mistaken. Oh, we were so wrong. I thought you were the hottest guy in the world, and she thought, and I thought you were the hottest girl in the world. You see, that's how it works. These days, that's just about the way it is. Did you never see a lovely and accomplished young woman, the pride of her friends, and the delight of a circle in which she moved? Her eye light with joy, and her step buoyant with hope. She had given her hand and plighted her vows at the altar of God, and her heart was fully in the pledge. She believed in it, man. She was into that pledge. To a superficial observer, it seemed that her happiness was complete. Oh, look at those two, young love. It's amazing, isn't it? They are so complete now. But why is it that a few short months have withered the rose on her cheek? Why has her eye lost its fire, her step its lightness? You detect frequent indications of absent thought, a mind abstracted from surrounding scenes and communing with untold sorrows. Her friends have marked the change with anxious solicitude. Anxious solicitude. And all wonder what can have produced this revolution. What started this war? The shades of the tomb gather early about her, and an aching and broken heart resigns its hold on earth to seek an asylum in the bosom of God. Do you ask the cause of all this thorough and speedy ruin? I answer, she was mistaken. She had given her heart and linked her destiny to a being incapable of appreciating the priceless jewel confided to him. She was a ruby, and you treated her like a piece of coal. Her heart had embarked all here, and all was lost. Or if you please, take another case, which is not by any means a fancy picture. I have seen a young man reared in respectability, nurtured in the lap of piety. During all his youth he was industrious, sober, temperate, and entirely amiable. His parents regarded him with honest pride, and his sisters loved to call him brother. He was looked upon by his youthful associates with respect and admiration, and all loved him. All praised him, and all his friends supposed that he had crowned his earthly bliss when he led to the altar a lovely and accomplished bride. But whence it is that he so early gives evidence that a strange change has come over his spirit of his dream? Why is it that his home has lost its charms? Why do his feet wander in the way of forbidden pleasures? Why is his eye red and his countenance bloated? Why does the midnight hour find him so often the companion of Babylonian revelers? And why so soon laid in a drunkard's grave? I answer, he was mistaken. He had wedded a lovely form, but enshrined the temper of a demon. He had staked his all of hope and peace on comfort of this union, and all is lost, and his soul has perished in the wreck. In conclusion, on this point, we say to our young friends, be sure to marry, but take very special care whom you marry. Are you seeking a wife? Pay close attention here. He's getting to the important part. Are you seeking a wife? Look well to her tempers, her taste, her habits. Let her be discreet, good-tempered, sober in her conversation, prudent in her associations, industrious in her habits, an obedient daughter. So important. An affectionate sister, one who can find ample enjoyment at home and is not dependent for happiness on company or fashion, either as to its wardrobe or public amusements. one who is not always seeking after or delighted with the flatteries of the other sex, one who is much more anxious to deserve commendation than to receive it. And finally, and above all, let her be unaffectedly and habitually pious. In other words, in the Word of God, understanding the Word, knowing the laws of God, knowing the ways of the Lord. I would not, said one who was not himself pious, marry any woman who was not a Christian. I should feel it such an honor to share a heart in which God dwelt. It was a fine thought and deserves to be specially remembered. You want a friend in whom you can have entire and unlimited confidence? One who can be your counselor in all circumstances of difficulty or trial, one who is to be identified with you through life in hope and fear and joy and sorrow. She is to be a sort of presiding divinity at thy family board. In her countenance, the mirror in which must be reflected the faithful image of thy domestic bliss or woe. I want you to take exception here. Consider what he just said. She is to be a sort of presiding divinity at thy family board. Family board. Government. It's implied right here, okay? In her countenance, the mirror of which will be reflected the faithful image of thy domestic bliss or woe, one who will be discreet, affectionate, and firm in governing her children. In short, who will love you for your own sake, be happy with you in a cabin, and who will cleave the closer to you when the storms of adversity or persecution shall have swept away or withered every vestige of earthly comfort from about you. Now bear all these things in mind, and then to your prayers and the exercise of a becoming prudence, and you will not be likely to fail. To my fair friends, a word of advice and an admonition. First of all, lend no ear to the wooing of him who is an unbeliever or skeptic on the subject of religion. The Bible is the great charter of woman's rights. Oh, let's say that again. Dear feminist of America, dear March for Women, dear all you organizations out there who want to play this game, okay? I want you to hear this sentence. Play it over and over again in your mind. The Bible is the great charter of women's rights. Women's rights. Where this book is not known, she is a slave. Think about that. Islam, she's a slave. Where this book is not known, she is a slave. Its influence exalts her to her proper station, and the man who, in this land of light and vision, can impudently question the authority of this, the great and only charter of your rights, gives strong indications of what his heart is capable of devising. Chuck Schumer. Need I say more? And if, after this warning, you confide your all to him, you will deserve what follows. Imagine marrying Chuck Schumer. You deserve what follows. Secondly, give not your heart to him who tarries long at the wine, who loves a social glass of brandy with his old friend, who is a connoisseur in mint juleps. Don't know what a mint julep is, but it sounds fancy. And the various preparations of the bar room. I love how they hyphenated that. If already the intoxicating draughts have bewitched them, what can you hope for in after years? Trust not what his love for you and your consequent influence over him will reform him. It is possible one such case out of 1,000 may have occurred, but believe me, it's a forlorn hope. If the sparkling glass, the Babylonian song, and the ribald and vulgar jest of the drunkard have charmed him, the tones of your voice, sweet as they are to him now, will soon lose their power to restrain him. Wed not the man who loves a game of cards or billiards, though he may be polished, intelligent, and prepossessing. Close thy heart against him and stop thy ears against his pleading. Canst thou trust his happiness in the hands of a gambler? Pause ere thou do it. His heart is false, his lips profane, and his passions his only acknowledged law of action. Listen not to the speech of him who is a drone in society. Amazing that they use that word drone. Mid-1800s. This is one who is a zombie, if you will, okay? Who is a drone in society, who is a lounger about taverns, adding nothing to the world's production, nothing to production whatsoever, but sprunging on the charity of others for bread. You want a friend, a protector, one who has a heart to appreciate you and who will love you for your own sake, sympathize with you in your griefs and pleasures, who will bear with you your weakness and gently correct your errors, and above all, one who will help you to heaven. In view of all these things, you should not deliberate well before you bind yourself with cords which you can never loose, and which may become more galling than the chains of the galley slave. When I look on woman, the loveliest of God's works, but feeble and helpless as she is lovely, I can but regard her with deep solicitude and look to her future with painful anxiety. When I see her hastily and without due caution taking up upon her vows which may consign her to disappointment and agony and heartbreaking. Man has strength and power, and these if used legitimately, might be the strength and protection of the gentler sex. But if a base and corrupt heart give direction to such attributes, what may a feeble, helpless woman expect under the wing of such protection? Alas, how many broken-hearted wives have gone down to an early grave, burying in the coffin the secret of their woe? And how many breaking hearts in this land are today struggling in hopeless despondency with a tide of wretchedness, whose source and depth are known only to God. Let the man of your choice be intelligent, a high-minded, honorable man who scorns the slightest approach to littleness or meanness. Let him be strictly temperate, industrious, and economical in his habits, with heart and hand and pocket, ready to promote every good work. In short, let him be a man of undissembled and consistent piety. Undisassembled and consistent piety. Or, at any rate, one who reverences God's name, his book, and the institutions of his house. Finally, let me say to you, marry no man upon a slight acquaintance. Take time, especially if you are an heiress, to scrutinize him closely before you consent to stand with him at the altar of God and say, I will. This concludes the chapter on matrimony. I think he gives very stern, very appreciable advice about whom we should find ourselves with. Now, many of us have already married, and I find myself among those who are very fortunate in that we did take time. We were together for many years before we finally tied the knot. We said, I will. I said, I do, but it was before God and the state of Florida. But they can go jump in the ocean. But the point here is that we should take these attributes that he just listed here. We should apply them to our own family government. Teach our kids and teach our neighbors and teach those who are associated with us, who would become members of our house, whether by blood or by association. Teach them to be all these things and to appreciate God's word in such a reverent way. To become pious, as was used back in the early 1800s, the word pious did not mean somebody who was overly religious, someone who was, overly aggressive, but instead it meant one who was devoted in the purest and most sustainable way to the Lord. So, with that, I'm going to close down this show. I hope that this has in some way been helpful to you. And as I find more of these kind of books, I'm going to bring them forward, and we're going to continue to study them and see what kind of quality information we can get out of them as we attempt to restore our houses to that which would have been prominent in early America. Okay, restore our houses to this new Jerusalem. So thank you for listening to the Hidalgo show. If you are interested in becoming a patron, the patron information is on the bottom of the screen. If you have any needs and you want any kind of counsel or help to establish your house, we have some tools that can guide you in the steps to establish your house, to restore your house back to a place of self-governing. So you can reach me at the email address that is now being shown at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, please subscribe, like, share my YouTubes, and let's get as many people as possible walking down this road together so we can truly restore a sacred assembly to the point of actually being able to promote good habits. All right, thank you very much, you guys. Thank you, everybody, for listening and for spreading this and for the good comments that I get back. I got some good feedback from the last one. Thank you all very much. God bless you. Remember, everything we do at the Hidalgo show and all of our ministries, we do it for the blood.